Hi there, welcome to the instructional video for my traditional honey challah dough recipe. I'll show you the tools you need, ingredients we'll be using, and then we'll put it all together and make our dough, which we'll be using for class. Here are our tools. They're simple ones. Of course, a work surface. It can be a countertop. I have a baking table or butcher block top, anything that you can clean off easily and mix and knead dough on. Mixing bowl. This is my favorite wooden bowl. It was a gift for my daughter, but certainly a stainless steel bowl or a ceramic bowl, anything that you like to mix dough in, as long as it's a good size, will do. A scale. We'll be measuring in metric, as it really is the easiest way to get all our ingredients together before we start to bake, and good habit to get into because things are more precise that way. This is a bench knife. If you don't have something like this, if you have something that can scrape on the counter, that is helpful, but if not, don't worry about it. It's something maybe you can put on a wish list for the future. This is a dough scraper, which just scrapes dough out of the bowl. But again, if you don't have one, it's okay. You can use your hands very successfully to scrape dough out of a bowl. I've done that many times when I didn't feel like running back to my pantry closet to get this. Then, of course, a mixing spoon, which, again, you can use or not. A lot of flexibility here. You can also use your hands to mix the ingredients in the dough, but a nice spoon and a whisk, because we will be, in this recipe, using eggs and honey, and nice to whisk those kind of gooey ingredients together a little more integrated that way. So for our first step, we're going to make what you can call a little pre-ferment. A pre-ferment is mixing just a small amount of all of the ingredients together, but just a smaller proportion, to get the yeast going, to get things started. You know, you really do see a difference in the quality of the bread if you do this. You can do a longer one that's overnight. If we did, I would suggest using less yeast than we're going to use right now. But this is just one we'll start in the morning. If you're using packaged yeast, it's a good way of proofing it to get the yeast going and making sure that it's active enough. If you're using instant or baker's yeast, this step isn't necessary, but you know, I like to do it anyway. It's a nice habit. So we're going to start off with some flour. I am using bread flour, which is a higher protein content flour, often used in bread machines. This is King Arthur brand. It's just a brand that I like, but there are other brands as well, as long as you have a good unbleached flour. This one happens to be organic. I am using my yeast. This is 10 grams of instant yeast, but you can also use active dry yeast as well. And this is water. This is a lukewarm to slightly warm water. Here we have 150 grams. So these are our initial ingredients for our little pre-ferment that we're going to mix and let sit for a while. And then as that is sitting and resting, I'll go over the rest of the ingredients that we need to complete our dough. So we're going to take our 150 grams of flour and just pour it in the bowl. We're going to add our 10 grams of yeast right along with the flour, and I will add the 150 grams of water. Okay, give it a good mix. Just make sure it's well integrated. It's going to have the consistency of kind of a milkshake. Don't need to use a whisk for this. I'm kind of in the habit of doing that because I do like to whisk the eggs in later. And as long as it's well mixed, you don't have to worry about getting all the lumps out. They'll kind of break down, but just enough that the flour and the water are mixed well. I like to use a dough scraper to kind of get all the miscellaneous dry parts off the sides and kind of bring them to the middle that way. And that's it. That is our first step. I'm going to cover this in plastic and let it sit for about 20 minutes or so, and you'll begin to see a lot of bubbling happening, and then we'll mix the rest of our ingredients. Just to correct myself, I think I mistakenly told you that I had 150 grams of flour and 150 grams of water. Might have changed that a few times there as I was talking, but it is 100 grams of flour, 10 grams of yeast, and 150 grams of water in this initial stage. Here are the rest of our ingredients. 2 eggs. They're large eggs, they weigh about 50 grams each, and I added, you can see it looks a little diluted, I added 50 more grams of water. I like to add the additional water later because I do like a certain consistency with the pre-ferment part, our initial mix. It would be a little too watery if I added this additional 50 grams, so I'll add it now. Then we have 100 grams of oil. I like to use an expeller pressed safflower oil. You can use canola oil. You can even use olive oil. So oil of choice, 100 grams. 100 grams of honey. This is a light amber honey, but again, different honey will bring a little different nuance, a little different taste to your challah. It's fun to experiment. And 15 grams of salt. This is sea salt. And while we're waiting for our pre-ferment to start getting a little bubbly, I thought I'd show you how to measure out ingredients on a scale if you're not really familiar with that. So what you'll want to do is turn your scale on. You can really get them very inexpensively. You know, it's a good investment for baking bread. I always recommend my students do start measuring ingredients. You'll see that when you turn it on, the number is 0, and you want to make sure that you will adjust the setting for grams because my recipes will be in grams. Then you'll put the bowl or your measuring receptacle, whatever it is, right on that scale, and you'll see that the weight of the bowl will show up. In this case, it's 240 grams. I'm going to hit that tare, T-A-R-E, which sets it back to 0. And then I'm going to simply add whatever ingredient it is. In this case, it's the flour. We'll just stop here at, I don't know, say 100 grams. You can, of course, use a scoop or a spoon or something to be a little more precise. But the great thing is if you go a bit over, so I'll go over here for you, like this. Oops, went to 130. If it's a dry ingredient, you know, even if it's a wet, if you do measure them separately in separate prep bowls, you can always take it out. And there's my measured out flour. And that was just a sample. That was an actual measurement for the flour, although that 100 grams is what we did start off with. So that's how you would measure 100 grams of flour. Okay, still waiting for our pre-ferment. We're just about there. It's kind of nice and aerated and getting fluffy, but I'll just review the ingredients again, okay? We had started off with 100 grams of flour that we put in our original mixing bowl. We added 10 grams of yeast. I used instant baker's yeast. You can use active dry yeast as well. And then we added 150 grams of lukewarm to slightly warm water, letting that rest with a little covering. You can use, people ask me, you can use a damp towel if you don't want to use plastic. Plastic really creates such a nice humid environment that I do like to use it for that purpose. And the rest of our ingredients, which we're just about to add, we'll just review. We have 2 eggs, which equals 100 grams of eggs, and I added another 50 grams of water to the eggs, just to add a little extra water to the ingredients without making our pre-ferment too watery in the beginning. 15 grams of salt. I like to use fine sea salt. 100 grams of oil. I use safflower oil, but you can use whatever you like. Olive oil is very, very nice as well. It gives a nice flavor, a kind of a rich flavor. And 100 grams of honey. This is our remaining balance of flour, which is 500 grams of our bread flour. Okay, so while I have you here, I think we're in good shape. You're not going to see a lot of bubbly activity because it does not need to be that fermented to where you have like all that bubbliness. It's just a little bit, you can see a little bit of aeration. That is just fine. I can see sort of air bumps coming up. Okay, so I'm going to add to my pre-ferment. First thing I'll add are the things I want to whisk. I will add eggs, the eggs, and I'll just go right ahead and add the oil. And I will also add the honey. Okay. One thing I did do is when I was measuring out the honey, I did measure out the oil in this bowl first, and then transferred it to the other bowl, and then put the honey in the bowl so it would come out a little more easily. Don't have to do that, but it was a habit I had of measuring oil first before honey. I had had for many, many years, so I decided to go with that. Okay, I'm going to grab our whisk and whisk these ingredients together to make them uniform. You want to break up the egg, of course. Just whisk them together. Start to see the beautiful amber color of egg, honey. There we go. Pretty well mixed, pretty smooth. And then I'm going to add my balance of flour, and I will add the sea salt as well. Then what I'm going to do is take this spoon, we don't need a whisk, it'll just all get stuck in the whisk because it's going to be a lot thicker at this point, and begin to integrate all the ingredients. People ask, you know, do you have to separate salt and yeast? You know, it's a very good question. It's a worthy question. I have heard two schools of thought on that. Some say never do that. Do not mix the salt with the yeast. We really don't have to worry about that with this recipe because we did a pre-ferment which already had flour. Some say you want to make sure there's flour there and you're not just doing the salt and the yeast. But another school of thought says, it's perfectly fine. So again, it's what you're used to, and the word on the street from some very prominent bakers is no, it does not damage the yeast to add it with the salt. So what I'm going to do now is begin to use my scraper, which is, quite handy. They're easy to find online from some baking sources, and scrape the sides of the bowl and integrate the flour before I start the kneading process. Okay, and then what I'll want to do is get in there with my hand and begin to knead right in the bowl. And at that point, you see a dough that is nice and uniform. Okay, well mixed, well integrated, time to knead. This dough is a somewhat firm dough. I mean, not so firm that you cannot feel it really extending and stretching when you knead, but it's definitely not a high hydration dough, say like a sourdough. So this two-handed kneading technique is really effective. You just want to push with the heel of your hand, fold it over toward you and then away from you. Fold it toward you, heel of your hand, push it away. Fold it toward you, heel of your hand, push it away. You want to bring about half over and do quarter turns each time. You can also do one hand this way and kind of roll it back. This is a very nice way of, again, working that gluten where you're stretching it. If you have a dough scraper or bench knife of any kind, you can kind of gather those crumbs up and just knead them right in, knead them right along. I see a little extra poppy seed from my bake the other day that escaped all that cleaning. Those poppy seeds, I tell you, they show up long after the bake. So if you ever buy bread and you see a little poppy seed in it, it's really difficult to not have one poppy seed lingering somewhere. Okay, so that's what I'll do now. I will just take a good, 5-10 minutes to knead my dough. You can see that it has sort of a sticky quality to it. I'm just using the bench knife to scrape that up. If you notice, I'm really not adding additional flour. It's really okay that it sticks to the work surface a little as you're initially working it, because that will work out. And if you're just that frustrated or it's not happening, you can always take a small amount of flour, very light film, don't want too much, and add it to the surface. But here again, as you see, almost every bread book you will ever read will tell you to resist the temptation, no matter how sticky it might feel. And of course, this will feel a little sticky because of eggs and honey and those enriched ingredients. Resist the temptation to add too much flour. Better off kneading or even letting it slightly rest as you knead it. I find that this one-handed technique really works the gluten in a way that even shortens the kneading time. So we're just going to knead and knead and knead. You can already see it coming together. You can see it changing right under your hands. Very, very exciting. I think I am adding just small amounts, as you can see, super small amounts of extra flour, just to make the kneading easier. It's really starting to come together now. You can see what it looks like as it starts to come together. And again, for this dough, we're going to be working it so much, dividing it, shaping it, braiding it, that I honestly don't know that we need to knead it to the point of what we call a gluten window. That is a test of gluten development where you take the dough and you see if you have a translucent, window there. You can see this is kind of coming apart a little, and I'm not super stretching it and you see that translucent window yet. And that's because it does need a little more kneading. But that said, I will knead this dough until I have a beautifully extensible dough. It's pushing back and bouncing back in my hands as I knead it. But I don't necessarily require myself to take it to that gluten window. In fact, it's a little bit of a habit for me when I'm mixing dough for my bread orders that I don't let it overmix in an electric mixer, and that's a good point I'd like to make. You can absolutely mix all of the ingredients together. Once you've made that pre-ferment in the beginning, you can add eggs, oil, honey, and salt, and the rest of your flour. You just have to be really careful not to overmix it. I would say on medium in a mixer, for me, not more than 2 or 3 minutes, and sometimes I'll even take it out and knead it by hand because, again, I tend to undermix. There's so much development going on in the rest of the process, and overmixing dough makes a very lackluster, flat-tasting dough because there's all kinds of things going on with oxygen and oxidizing and a science far beyond my knowledge that does not give you the dough you want. So here we are, we're about to this point. Gluten window is beginning to form, as you can see. We do have some, I'm holding it up too high, some of that translucent quality there. We do have some of that, so I think we are pretty much good to go here. I'll just need a couple more minutes, and then we'll put it in the bowl. Okay, so we're just gonna keep kneading until, you know, we really feel that buoyant kind of bounce under our hands. You can really see it changing. I even walked away. I got interrupted and let it rest like a minute or two. And that's another trick, letting dough rest. When it's not doing what you want, you can walk away from it. You can cover it if it's more than, a couple of minutes. And you will see that'll be easier to work with when you get back, because what's actually happening is the flour is being absorbed into the water, and the gluten is allowed to relax and will really be easier to work with when you come back to it. I have found that to be the case, and a lot of bakers recommend that. Okay, so this is getting super smooth under my hands now. I can get a little bit of a window for you there. You can see a little translucent window. Again, not developed to the max, but I think just dandy. I think it's gonna be a beautiful dough for our challah class. And what I'll do now is I will just give it a couple more turns and put it in the bowl. Let it rise a good, it's really an hour and a half to 2 hours, this dough. It could be as little of an hour if it's really warm in your kitchen. You kind of have to play that by ear. I would check it after an hour, and I'll show you what it looks like fully risen, and we will be good to go for our class together. And here we have our dough. It is risen a couple of hours. I did not put very warm water in it, so it probably took about between 2 and 3 hours, but typically it'll be between 1 and 2. There we have it, and I will show you nice and fluffy. We'll be baking with you soon.